running?
Well, you're falling out.
Okay, well, I've got lots of snow. Problem is, a lot of them are older.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
I've never posted snow.
Good evening. My name is Lizette Coley, and as Executive Director of Parapsychology Foundation, and on behalf of our Board of Trustees and our President, Mrs. Eileen Coley, somewhere in the back, we welcome you all here this evening. The Foundation is particularly pleased to have as our speaker this evening Dr. Stephen Braude, who is eminently capable of discussing the topic at hand here inside. Dr. Braude has been a past president of the Parapsychological Association. He has been a grant recipient not only of Parapsychology Foundation, but of many other organizations as well. He has been a participant in some of the Foundation's international conferences as well. Let's see. Well, apart from his career in parapsychology, Dr. Braude is a noted philosopher. He's chairman of the Department of Philosophy at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. He's written many articles and essays for philosophical journals, as well as parapsychological journals, and is the author of several books, two of which are on sale this evening here, First Person Plural, and The Limits of Influence. In addition to that, I think he's also somewhat of a great musician, and despite the fact that we have a musical stand here tonight, the bad news is we're not going to be able to avail ourselves of that. However, we're in for a treat this evening with this presentation, so I'm going to pass you over to Dr. Braude.
Thanks.
Well, if the talk starts going badly, I can do my David Lee Roth impression. You're supposed to hear that echo?
Keep going, I'll take care of it.
Okay. I want to tell you how I became interested in investigating psychic phenomena and how my thinking about it all evolved, and in general what I've learned about myself and about the academic community along the way. And in the process, I'll have some things to say about the history of parapsychology and the future, such as it may be, for research in the field. Actually, this talk is basically going to be a kind of rant about intellectual dishonesty and cowardice. And I suppose in a kind of perverse way, I hope it causes you some pain. I think suffering ought to be spread around. Actually, I believe that only sex is too intimate to be shared with someone else. So let me start by telling you how I got into all of this. And I'm not doing this just to be self-indulgently autobiographical. There really is a point to all of this. What got me started is an event that took place when I was in graduate school back in the late 60s. It was a slow day in Northampton, Massachusetts, as they usually were. And a couple of friends came over and they said, let's play this game called Table Up. What they meant was, let's have a seance. Now, you need to understand that at this time in my life, I was busy writing a dissertation on temporal logic and the philosophy of language, and I fancied myself to be a kind of hard-nosed materialist. Not for any particularly good reasons, it was just a kind of intellectual conceit I was cultivating in those days. And since it was a slow day, and since my friends and I had seen the only movie in town, I said, sure, let's do it. And for the next 3 hours, I watched my table rise in the air and spell out answers in response to questions. Now, I mean, there's no way I can describe this that would send a skeptic to his knees, but there are some things I can tell you. I can tell you that it was broad daylight. I can tell you that this was my table. It went on for 3 hours. I had ample opportunity to observe the phenomenon while it was occurring. I could make sure that my friends weren't trying to pull something over on me. I had plenty of opportunities to look under and around the table. If one of my friends got up to go to the toilet, the table continued doing what it was doing anyway. Even though our hands were just resting lightly on the table was rising underneath the hands of the two remaining people. I can tell you that my friends were not practical jokers. I'm not even sure they had a sense of humor. I should tell you that we were not stoned. So, to me, it was a very compelling thing to see. Unfortunately, at that time in my life, I was more concerned about writing my dissertation and getting my PhD and getting the hell out of graduate school. and getting a job. So I realized, however dimly, that my mentors probably wouldn't have been too happy to hear about all of this and wouldn't have been very supportive. So I didn't bother to tell anybody, and I literally put the whole thing out of mind. I put it on the back burner until I got my PhD and I got a job and I got tenure. So I went through the usual routine of publishing articles and stuff in philosophy in more conventional areas and earning a reputation as being a reasonably intelligent, level-headed person. And then I got tenure and I realized that, I had the chance and the academic freedom, at least ostensibly, to pursue whatever interests I had. And at that point I remembered that I had this very interesting table tilting episode. And I actually had the luxury now of being able to think about it and try to make some sense out of it, even though at the time I hadn't any idea where to place it in the overall scheme of things. And I realized that when I got started doing that if I was going to do some research in parapsychology, I first needed to find out if there was something to sink my teeth into philosophically. So I knew that some famous philosophers had written about it, and I read what they had to say, and I decided there was something here worth attending to. And since I wanted to do some work in the philosophy of mind and the philosophy of science, I figured this was at least one way to pursue some conventional topics in a less conventional way, at least not from the same old direction. And then I decided if I was going to do a responsible job of that I needed to become a member of the relatively small community of academics and scientists who were taking phenomena seriously, so at least I was on top of things both empirically and theoretically. And that I did, and as Lisette said, I've served a term, in fact, as Parapsychological Association president. So I guess I'm as much of an insider as it's possible to be in this particular community. And now that I've pretty much sullied my reputation in the academic community, I'm fortunate enough to get occasional calls to go out and check out some interesting phenomena for myself. What I tend to focus on are psychokinetic or PK phenomena, not because I think those phenomena are intrinsically more valuable or interesting than ESP. It's just that I think they're easier to document and to investigate. Mental phenomena are extremely hard to document and verify, and healing phenomena, however interesting they may be, are very difficult to distinguish operationally from other sorts of phenomena like self-healing through hypnosis. And I also try to avoid phenomena that are only very sporadic or occasional. I can't take the time, and I certainly don't have the resources or the time to investigate your average haunting or poltergeist case. You can't be sure that something's going to happen when you get there. And for some inexplicable reason, my philosophy department doesn't have anything set aside in its budget for these kinds of case investigations. So if I'm not riding media's coattails, I have to finance these myself. So I'm usually going after somebody who purports, at least, to be able to produce phenomena on demand. But enough about me. Let me get back to something about this original table tilting episode. The physical phenomena of table levitations and table tilting are obviously very interesting, and I've had a lot to say about that, and I've written a lot about it. But today, what intrigues me most about that particular episode in my life is the surprising visceral reaction I had to it at the time. I experienced a lot of things. I experienced skepticism, I experienced puzzlement and curiosity. But what stands out for me most now about all of that was that the phenomena scared the hell out of me. But why should I have felt such an intense fear? I didn't understand it at all at the time, although characteristically I was at no loss for inadequate explanations. But now I think I have a clue as to what was going on. And if I'm right, it might help explain certain interesting things about the evidence for PK in general and the way scientists and scholars have dealt with the evidence. And I think that has larger implications about life within the academic and scientific community, and has implications, I think, also about the future of parapsychological research in general. And I think it also can teach us some things about the nature of rationality, and so I want to try to talk about all of those. So what was my fear about? It's tempting to say, at least initially, that It was just the fear of the unknown, but I don't think that's going to get us very far. There are lots of unknown things that don't scare us at all. So what was it specifically about seeing my table go up in the air that scared me? Of course, on the surface, in the context of a seance, it appeared that something other than the three of us in the room was causing the table to move. I mean, ostensibly, it was some discarnate agency. Actually, three. At first, we allegedly contacted John Wayne, who had recently died. And then it was the river Styx. So I don't think we were actually in touch with a discarnate entity at that moment. And then the last communicator claimed his name was Horace T. Jeckham and said he had built the spooky old 18th century house I was living in. I thought, well, that was cool. All I needed to do to verify that was to go down to City Hall and find out who built my house. Unfortunately, it turned out that the house was so old it antedated city records, so I never did find out who built this spooky house that I lived in. At any rate, on the surface it looked like some disembodied, discarnate, deceased communicator was causing the table to move. Now, if so, why should that have been frightening? I mean, maybe I was just too blindly and uncritically attached to my philosophical conceits at the time, even to take seriously the possibility of spirit influence, but I don't think that was it. And besides, I mean, there have been lots of contexts since then when I've allowed myself, I believe, very sincerely to take that possibility seriously, and it hasn't scared me at all. I realize that if you take seriously the idea of spirit influence, then you have to take seriously the idea of vengeful spirits, and so maybe that was scary, but I don't think that was it either. Looking back on it now, I think what was really going on is that what scared me was the possibility that one or more of the three living people in the room was causing the table to move. And that one of us was doing it psychokinetically, and presumably unconsciously. Now, the big question then is, if that's what scared me, why did it scare me? And that's what I want to address. There are a number of points, related points I want to make about this. One of them is that it's a very small leap conceptually from making, say, a pencil move a millimeter or so psychokinetically to making somebody drop dead. So what that means is that if we take the existence of any PK seriously, we have to take seriously the possibility of a kind of magical worldview that most of us associate, usually condescendingly, only with so-called primitive cultures. It's a magical view according to which people can do all sorts of nasty things to one another. And in which we also have to be prepared to take responsibility for all sorts of things going on around us that most of us would just as soon be bystanders for rather than actual participants in. It means, for example, that if one of us has a nasty, vagrant thought about somebody and then that person has an accident, we have to take seriously the possibility that we might be implicated in that disaster. And so I think one of the payoffs of accepting the reality of PK is accepting the potential responsibility for all sorts of things that most of us are very uncomfortable accepting responsibility for. And I'll come back to that shortly. Now, maybe I don't need to make this point here, but I'm going to make it anyway. When I start, at least to some audiences, mostly academic audiences, when I start talking about this stuff, I find I usually have to overcome a kind of resistance to the idea that even if PK exists, it could be happening on a large scale. So let me just say one or two things about that. One point is that given our current level of ignorance about the nature of psychic stuff, and I'd say our level of ignorance is considerable, there's no reason to think that psychic functioning always has to be at a small or moderate level. I mean, in fact, I'd say it's methodologically indefensible to open the door to the paranormal, even if we're just doing it as a thought experiment, and then deciding to open it only a crack. I mean, given how little we know about what's going on, if we're going to accept, even hypothetically, the existence of ESP and PK, we have to be prepared, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, to accept it all the way. That means we have to be prepared to allow that it could happen at any level of refinement and at any degree of magnitude. however uncomfortable that may make us. Also, I should mention that, large-scale effects, like making somebody drop dead from a heart attack, or making a car crash, or a plane crash, or whatever, or a mine collapse, these don't necessarily require initial psychic events of enormous magnitude. They just require events of an appropriate scale in the right place. And you can cause somebody to drop dead by just doing the right thing in the heart or the brain. You can cause a mine to collapse by just attacking the weak part of the support structure, and so on. So we don't need to suppose that if a large object blows up, it's because somebody created a huge psychic explosion initially. It might just be a cunningly refined effect in the right place at the right time. Now, I realize that once we allow PK into the picture here, that we're opening the door to beneficial sorts of effects as well. But I think what scares us about this is the specter of psychic snooping in the case of ESP or telepathic influence, that people might be affecting our actions, and all sorts of potential malevolent uses of our psychic powers, the evil eye and hexing and so on. And it's not just fear of what others can do to us, as I said a minute ago. I think it's also the fear of ourselves. It's the fear of what we might be doing when we can't control our thoughts. And the fact is that most of our thoughts we can't control. Now, one of the things that I find sort of perversely encouraging about the field of parapsychology is that I think more and more people working in the field these days are acknowledging that the fear of psi is prevalent both outside the field of parapsychology and inside the field as well. And it's interesting, in fact, to watch how parapsychologists betray the fear of psi. The late Jewel Eisenbud used to argue that laboratory experimenters in parapsychology exhibited in all sorts of interesting ways. One of them is through the careless mistakes they make when they should know better. Just the kinds of mistakes they make which retrospectively would undermine their experiments. They say, oh, hell, I should have done that. Why didn't I think of it at the time? I mean, when they clearly know better, why did they allow these things to happen? There's another way in which Eisenbud said that he thought the fear of psi could creep in unconsciously or subtly into experimenters' work. He called it a kind of widespread methodological piety, in which researchers go through endless sorts of pseudoscientific fussiness and obsessional piddling about what they're doing, which he said usually manages to strangulate any sort of significant occurrence of psi. To put it another way, what happens in many cases, I think, is that under the guise of being very careful scientifically, some researchers manage to make experiments so complicated and so artificial that they succeed in snuffing out all manifestations of psi at all, except what's significant maybe at the 0.05 level, with odds against chance of 20 to 1. Now, see, that's enough to merit publishing a paper. It helps researchers feel successful, and it seems to justify publishing their work. But it's not enough to really seriously threaten their deeper wish that psi really doesn't occur. I think the fear of psi may also, at least among working parapsychologists, might also explain why so many of them have been slow to realize how futile it is to continue with laboratory research. Now, don't get me wrong. I know people do get me wrong on this. I don't think that laboratory research has been a total waste of time. But I do believe that it can't do what J.B. Rhine thought it could do. So let me just say a few words about that. That's actually a topic for another talk, and if you want to know what I thought about that, you can always look at the limits of influence. That sounds more like a sleazy plug than I meant it to. That's not a sleazy plug. I can show you a sleazy plug. A fabulous book on sale here. This is the book of which Carl Sagan once said, never read it.
Recommendation.
What I had in mind here is that, Rhine's idea was that only by conducting controlled experiments in parapsychology, where we can control and manipulate crucial variables, will parapsychologists ever have an opportunity to get really clean evidence for the existence of psi and thereby silence the skeptics. Now, what interests me about all of this is that I think the so-called Rhinian revolution has been a complete failure. And interestingly, I think it's failed in just those respects in which it was supposed to succeed. In fact, most skeptics have not been convinced by decades of laboratory research. And certainly they haven't been any more persuasively converted than they were decades before by studies of mediums and so on. But there's an even deeper problem. And it has to do with what we can ever learn from controlled experiments in parapsychology. It has to do, in fact, with the question of whether you can even do a controlled experiment in parapsychology. Now think about this. Parapsychological experimenters are testing for phenomena which, if they exist, would by their very nature circumvent any controls we can impose. And you cannot have a double-blind experiment, for example, in parapsychology, if you mean blind for ESP. You can't have a PK experiment in which you can be absolutely certain that only the official subject is using the psychic ability being tested for. You can't screen out PK from onlookers or experimenters, or for that matter, someone living in the trunk of an old Studebaker in Gary, Indiana. There's no way to know who's doing what to whom, or when it's being done. But the fact is that researchers in parapsychology proceed as if people involved in laboratory experiments are adhering to this kind of idiotic gentleman's agreement, so that only the official subject will use the psychic ability being tested for. That subject will use it only at the time prescribed, when the experimenter's gun goes off, never before or afterwards. And that nobody else in the experiment will use whatever psychic abilities they have for whatever purposes are important to them to muddy the experimental waters. This is not rocket science. This is a very easy point to get. But experimenters continue to proceed as if they can draw clear results from their research. The fact is, the only thing that we can know clearly from decades of laboratory research is that there's some anomaly that needs to be explained. There's no way, in principle, of knowing what exactly is going on. The only way I think you can ever know is to have the kind of superstar subject that we had around the turn of the last century, the best physical mediums. Now, actually, we do have and have had some subjects in lab experiments who can get or have gotten reasonably good results with a number of different experimenters in different labs. I think there, at least, we have a prima facie case for saying this person is implicated in the results. That's about all we can say. Can't go much further than that. The idea that we can do process-oriented work in parapsychology lab experiments, I think, is a total myth. But that is another topic. I mean, but it's not unrelated to this. I mean, I think that maybe only a few psychic superstars can actually escape the psychological straitjacket imposed by test conditions in lab experiments. I mean, for all we know, functioning psychically in a lab may be as difficult for most people as having an orgasm on their own. Actually, you know what my students call this? They call this the fart factor. Mm-hmm. Because most people can fart for somebody or other, but not just for anybody. I mean, and in fact, farting is not the only such capacity that is very situation sensitive. I mean, we have lots of them. It could be singing, acting, sensual, or whatever. The fact is, there are lots of things that we can do only in quite selective circumstances. And we have no way of knowing, certainly ahead of time, whether psychic functioning is that sort of capacity. In fact, I mean, there may be another valuable analogy with athletics. There are lots of abilities that we can study only in real-life situations. I mean, if you want to study, for example, a tennis player's ability to return serves, you have to see how that person plays a game. I mean, some people practice differently than they play. So you need to study a tennis player's ability to return serves in an actual context when opponents are trying their hardest to win. And even if you take away the psychological pressures of working within an actual game situation, there are still certain kinds of athletic capacities that can only be studied in the game context. I mean, if you want to evaluate a quarterback's ability to read defenses or a base runner's ability to steal second, you have to see how these people play in an actual game. And for all we know, psychic abilities might also be the sorts of things that can be studied profitably only in real-life sorts of situations. For all we know, it's premature and totally inappropriate to even try to bring it into the lab. Until we know what we're dealing with, we have no idea. And so, to suppose that PK, for example, has to conform to our preferred method of scientific investigation, I think, is a bit of hubris. It's like expecting nature to conform to our preferred methods of investigation. I think a more reasonable way is just see what cards nature deals us and go from there. And if you're disappointed that PK doesn't seem to respond the way we'd like, it's, I think, quite stupid, actually, to conclude that, as some people do, that it doesn't exist. That's like concluding that penile erections are illusory, because a few porn stars notwithstanding, we can't get them to occur on demand. But back to the fear of psi. I guess I digressed. But not entirely, because another interesting manifestation of the fear of psi, I think, is the way it seems to have shaped the course of parapsychology around the turn of this century. Skeptics often like to sneer at very large-scale PK, like full table levitations or materializations. And they point out often that these things seem to have disappeared from the parapsychological scene. And the main reason they usually say is technology has now made it much too easy to detect fraud when it occurs. And so we just don't see as much of this stuff anymore because it's harder to perpetrate the kind of fraud that people were getting away with around the turn of, or at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Now, even though that position is promulgated as an obvious piece of received wisdom, I think, to put it bluntly, that it's not only defective, I think it's foolish. And often it demonstrates a grossly superficial command of the data and the issues, and so much so that you can only wonder why proponents of that view would risk being embarrassed by flaunting their ignorance in public. Without going into the whole matter here, again, Limits of Influence has the gory details. Let me just say a couple things about this. One point is that the skeptics' appeal to technology is a double-edged sword. Technology limited, let's put it this way, technological primitiveness at the end of the 19th century limited not only the means for detecting fraud, it also limited the means for perpetrating fraud. I mean, just as there were no small electrical devices that could surreptitiously produce some of the effects that were being reported, there were also no small electrical devices. There were no small electrical devices either for detecting or producing a phenomenon. So today it's much easier to simulate phenomena by means of various kinds of subtle devices, and it's much easier to detect some too. So my position on all of this is forget about phenomena that are so small scale that they can be easily mimicked by sleight of hand and diversion techniques. Forget about phenomena that are easily producible with even today's technology. There are some things that were reported around the end of the 19th century that are beyond even today's technology. For example, D.D. Hume's materialized hands. Even so, there are some cases that I think we have to take seriously. There are plenty that were produced in situations where there was no opportunity for planting an apparatus or concealing a confederate, where the phenomena were produced pretty much on demand in locations never before visited by the subjects. And let me give you one of my favorite cases. This is from the study of D.D. Hume. As some of you may know, Hume was investigated by, among others, physicist William Crookes. And one of Hume's favorite phenomena was to make an accordion play on demand, sometimes melodies on request. And reports were coming in that the accordion would float around in midair. Sometimes it would play while it was held just at the end away from the keys. Sometimes nobody had to touch it. But where Hume liked to have it play was under the seance table. He thought the power was strongest under the table. Now that is just the kind of thing that is designed to arouse suspicion. And Crookes knew that. So he was also smart enough to recognize that it might not be a good idea to try to make Hume do something that was contrary to conditions in which he was comfortable. So the creative thing for an experimenter to do was to find ways of working around that. So he did. Here's what he did. First of all, he bought a new accordion. Okay, so there could be no doubt that this was Hume's problem. Hume didn't see it until the experiment was underway. He went to Hume's apartment to pick him up, watched Hume change clothes so he could determine that Hume wasn't concealing some sort of device on his body that would have counted for the phenomena. Although in 1871, it's not clear what this would have been. So he took Hume back to his house, and he had built a cage made of wire and wood, which fit just under his dining room table. There was room for Hume to get his hand under the tabletop and inside the cage so he could hold the accordion at the end away from the cage. There wasn't enough room for Hume to get his hand inside the cage so that he could actually manipulate the keys. There were 2 observers stationed on either side of Hume to make sure that he wasn't doing anything suspicious, like get his feet out of his boots, which you'd think people would have noticed. And there was another observer stationed with a lamp under the table to watch what was going on inside the cage. Under those conditions, the accordion was seen to flop around and contract, and the keys were depressed and sounds came out of the accordion. And then the conditions were varied a little bit. An electric current was run through the cage, Hume took his hands out of it, and the accordion was still seen to be moving around inside the cage. I think that's a pretty nifty experiment. It's something that skeptics have not duplicated, and I challenge them to do it under conditions similar to those imposed by Crookes. So I think that that's not only an interesting but a very important piece of evidence. Now, the fact is, as the skeptic likes to note, we don't see these kinds of things anymore. But if we can't explain why we don't see this kind of thing much anymore by appealing to the advent of modern technology, what's the reason? Well, let me make one suggestion about this. I think the fear of psi has played a role here, and here's the way. It's important to realize that the really nifty large-scale phenomena at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries happened within the context of the spiritualist movement. All the great mediums were either spiritualists or at least confirmed spiritists. That is, they thought that they were not literally producing the phenomena. They thought that they were literally mediums for the production of the phenomena. So that meant that they were off the hook psychologically no matter what happened. So if no phenomena occurred, or if only uninteresting phenomena occurred, then the mediums could easily chalk that up to an inept communicator or to a weak link with the spirit world. And maybe even more importantly, if good phenomena occurred, then the medium didn't have to fear the extent of her power. She didn't have to think to herself, even unconsciously, wow, if I could be doing that here, who knows what havoc I might be wreaking outside the safe confines of a seance. So the mediums did not have to experience the fear of what Freud called the omnipotence of thought. The medium did not have to deal with this fear of responsibility for things going on around her. Now, to help reinforce this point, I find the following to be very interesting. See, initially, when all this started to happen at the beginning of the spiritualist movement, there weren't too many scientists in on the picture. It wasn't being investigated as relentlessly as it was later on. It was a little later in the game that more and more people started to take seriously the idea that the medium, rather than spirits, were producing the phenomena. And that changed the psychodynamics of the whole process in very interesting ways. I mean, more and more people, not necessarily the mediums themselves, but more and more people started implicating the medium in the production of the phenomena rather than discarnate spirits. Now, even if the medium didn't accept that, this was an idea that was increasingly in the air. And so I submit to you that it was something that the medium had to acknowledge, however reluctantly and maybe unconsciously. And I think that that changed the psychological condition for producing the phenomena. And I don't think it's coincidental that the phenomena, as the 20th century progressed, started to become more and more small scale, as more and more people began to take seriously the possibility of the medium being the PKer here. So you get down to, say, the Schneider brothers in the 20s and 30s, and you see the phenomena are much smaller scale than they were in the cases of D.D. Hume and then later Eusebia Palladino. And then when you come to the mid-20th century and you see the PK, so-called PK superstars like Nina Kulagina and Felicia Paris, notice what happens there. These women thought that they were literally producing a phenomena. They were accepting responsibility for it. And the phenomena were extremely small scale. And if you watch the films of them producing a phenomena, what you see are people sweating and straining to make the smallest object movements. Now, how convenient is that from your point of view? I mean, if they have to work that hard to produce such a small effect, they don't have to experience any kind of momentous fear of psi. I mean, you can see how from their point of view they might think, gee, if I have to work that hard to make a pill bottle move a millimeter, then, I'm going to suffer internal hemorrhaging before, a table levitates or before somebody drops dead. And I find that too suggestive to be dismissed very easily. It seems to me that taking mediumship seriously is something that's unusually conducive to the production of large-scale phenomena. That as soon as we start accepting responsibility ourselves for the phenomena, it just scares the hell out of us, much in the way that I found myself scared when I saw my table go up in the air. I want to say something else about the fear of psi. I can't let this topic drop without noting another way in which it occurs. It's as common today as it was during the heyday of spiritualism. It continues to amaze me how otherwise smart people argue against the existence of psi, especially the more dramatic manifestations of psi. Too often, it seems to me, critics resort very easily to lines of argument that they'd be very quick to detect as weak if they had been the targets of those arguments themselves. And they very quickly resort to ad hominem arguments or generalizing from the weakest cases. I mean, it's almost as if a veil of idiocy descends on people who are otherwise usually penetrating and intelligent. I mean, it's unlikely that in most other contexts the skeptics who offer some of these arguments would so readily resort to generalizing from the weakest cases, for instance. What they do, for example, and if you read some of the literature on D.D. Hume, you find a lot of people dismissing the entire case because it turns out some of Hume's phenomena can be mimicked by sleight of hand techniques. Or you find somebody like Trevor Hall dismissing the case of D.D. Hume because he might have been gay, or he might have had an affair with one of his benefactors, or because his alleged levitation out the window of Ashley House was poorly documented. Trevor Hall spends an enormous percentage of his entire book dealing with the Ashley House levitation. That happens to be one of the most poorly documented incidents in the entire career of D.D. Hume. It happened in darkness. It's irrelevant to an assessment of the case. Am I supposed to believe that these otherwise intelligent people don't realize that it's the best documented pieces of evidence that count, not the worst documented? I mean, look, I realize that even smart people can suffer uncontrolled spasms of stupidity. Okay? What I get suspicious about is when these attacks of stupidity occur almost exclusively in connection with parapsychology. It's much more plausible to me that what's happening is that these skeptics are simply in a kind of conceptual panic, and that the panic is not too different from what I experienced back in the late 60s when I saw my table rise. And this is why I think that so many reputable scientists and scholars dishonestly pretend that they can speak with authority on parapsychology when they know that they don't even know what the evidence is. I mean, I see this all the time. And I'm willing to assume that the people who do this are not dishonest most of the time. I mean, I think this form of dishonesty is subject-specific. And I believe it's a fear response, and I think it's a reaction to being threatened. So why do they feel threatened? I mean, there are all sorts of reasons we can give. I mean, apart from the general fear of psi that I mentioned, there can be lots of reasons. They might feel, incorrectly actually, that the existence of ESP and PK would undermine a scientific worldview that they're very comfortable with. For a variety of reasons I again outline in Limits. I don't think that we have to fear that. That just usually results from a kind of confused thinking, and usually, in fact, from a kind of physicalistic reductionism. But even if it's true, it's still just a cowardly clinging to things that are familiar, and I think that's indefensible. Also, I think there's another fear. I think a number of scholars and scientists have this dim idea that if we allow psi into the picture, it's threatening in another way. I mean, if psychic functioning occurs, it's not going to occur only for parapsychologists who set out to look for it. It could be occurring all the time. If it occurs in laboratory situations, it's not going to occur just for parapsychologists who are working in the lab. So if psi occurs at all, for all we know, it could have been infecting centuries worth of conventional scientific experimentation. So I think there might be a kind of dim fear in at least some people's minds that if we allow psi into the picture, then all hell's going to break loose. We don't know what to make of anything. you don't know what scientific results to take seriously. And it's interesting to me, at any rate, to see how, if you look over the history of parapsychology, to see how prominent scientists have really behaved in execrable ways when it comes to dealing with the data, how they've abused their positions of authority. Again, I'm going to send you to, to limits for some of those tales, unless you force me to talk about it later. So, before I put you in that position, let me just wax philosophical for a second. See, I think we can learn something from all of this about the nature of rationality. It seems to me that when philosophers and scientists try to explain what rationality is all about, that they characterize rationality in an unacceptably narrow way. I mean, rationality is not simply a matter of making decisions in a disinterested way, or a matter simply of weighing options and calculating benefits and assessing risks. Well, that's the way a lot of philosophers and scientists describe rationality. They do it, for example, in game theoretic terms. But I think that a much deeper way of characterizing rationality would take rationality to have a kind of ethical component to it as well. I mean, rationality is about making decisions, of course, but it's also about making decisions in the face of challenges. When we weigh alternatives, that's something that we don't do in an emotional or psychological vacuum. We have to make our choices under pressure, the pressure of challenges to positions that we're comfortable with, or challenges to positions that we've staked our careers on. So I'd say that rationality involves, among other things, the virtue of courage, and probably also the virtues of humility and honesty. Of course, they're all related. But I'd say it's intellectually irresponsible to pretend to be authoritative on matters about which you know you're ignorant, especially when you know that your opinions are going to be treated as authoritative, more or less automatically. And I'd say it's cowardly to condemn and avoid research into subjects that challenge familiar and comfortable positions. So when scientists display an absence of these virtues, whether it's in connection with parapsychology or in connection with some other area of controversial research, I'd say they're not simply exhibiting moral failures, I'd say they're also exhibiting failures of rationality. See, that sounds like a good high moral tone to end this on, so I think I'll stop there and let you take your best shot. Now, I had a feeling George would be able to go.
For the last 2 decades, I would guess that you have continued to rant against experimental parapsychology. Have you published at least one empirical study of the phenomena that you are espousing that others investigate?
No.
Why?
Well, I've investigated some. I have my reasons for not publishing them. Usually out of respect for the subject.
But you prefer to rant against those who do investigate?
No. I rant against those who conduct experiments.
Yes, you rant, but you will not contribute to the literature in the area that you suggest others do so.
Why should I do that? I know what my areas of expertise are professionally. I mean, this is an a priori argument against having a controlled experiment in parapsychology. I don't need to conduct an experiment to make that point.
And you need not contribute to the literature of anything else either to make an empirical contribution.
I wouldn't say I don't contribute to the literature.
To make an empirical contribution.
I don't see why I need to do that.
Fine.
Yes.
You discussed the fear of sign. I was wondering if there's an adjunct to the people who are arguing against the existence of, we'll just take for the matter that, okay, it exists. And somebody comes across and says, no, this doesn't exist. And I agree with you that could be fear-based. Could you address the role of the person's ego as well? In other words, the challenge that psi brings to one's ego as an alternative power that can't be contained.
I just want to make sure I understand.
Well, what is the role, do you think, of, we're 90% water and squishy creatures full of, we're very malleable. And therefore, when psi occurs, taking for the matter that it does occur, would you think that part of our fear is based because it challenges our ego? It shows how small we are. It reduces us to lesser of an energy than the psi. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm asking.
No, I understand. I'm not aware that that's played a major role in any of the lives or careers of parapsychologists I've known. I mean, if it has, I would say it's probably been a subsidiary role to some of the other fears. I mean, there are all sorts of things that make us feel small on the face of the universe.
Oh, sure. But I was wondering, in terms particularly of the skeptics who say, they go for the most generally categorized arguments that you had referred to. And I was wondering, at least in my own experience, that often when people feel that they're in the presence of something they can't explain, it's because they can't explain.
Oh, well, yeah, there might be that kind of smallness.
That's what I'm asking you. Do you find that and so on?
Very possibly, but I actually think a deeper and more widespread sort of fear has been playing a role in the development of science for quite some time. I mean, look, if you look over the several hundred years, most recent several hundred years in the history of science, in a way, one way of characterizing what's been going on is that it's been making causation more and more impersonal. It's been taking the human being and intention out of the scheme of things, characterizing causal connections as impersonally as possible. I think one of the payoffs to taking psi seriously is that it puts the person back in. And it may put the person back in ways that are ineliminable.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the last word was?
Ineliminable. It may mean
not
that,
to eliminate.
Yes. So for all we know, we're playing a role in everything that's going around
Right.
all the time, and in ways that we can't control,
Right.
in ways that we can't tease out. And it may mean that we have to take with a much larger grain of salt centuries of scientific experimentation and results. We don't really know what's going on. We don't understand what role we've played in the way nature has been shaped. Yes, Rick.
I think maybe you underestimate the threat to the worldview, that people have. And I'm mindful of the comment made by so many skeptics. I know this cannot be true, and even if it was, I wouldn't believe it. And maybe the ego does come into that. We have a very cherished idea of the way things are and our role in the world as we know it. And if we have to change all that, it's scary.
Well, I do think that to some extent is a kind of cowardice about giving up the familiar. You see it in bad marriages too, and all sorts of similar things. People are just unwilling to accept that there's something rotten at home. So, I'm quite sure that does play a role. It's not just the fear of responsibility. I think there are a number of fears, but again, that's just one of the challenges that has to be faced, I think, really to exhibit rationality. Hans, I think you had
One of the problems is, and one of the advantages of the phenomena is that it cannot be repeated at will, which I consider an advantage, because I think all phenomena are emotionally caused. And therefore, the whole business about empiric science is a lot of waste of time.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well, I do.
Yeah. I think it has been repeated, and as reliably as lots of other things. I think some of our best psychic superstars could produce phenomena as reliably as Michael Jordan could sink a shot, but he had his
Yeah,
bad
but
days.
these are emotionally tinged phenomena, and the emotions are never the same.
Playing basketball isn't?
Absolutely. The energy does the
It
same.
isn't, you're
What?
saying? Playing basketball is not emotional?
Yeah, only secondarily. But this is the whole energy comes from the emotion. The same is the psychic energy. It's the same energy that creates romantic feelings, that creates sexual phenomena. It's one and the same, and they are never quite repeatable. And to try to repeat, to make a condition that the phenomenon has to be repeatable in the laboratory is a waste of time. And Ryan, of course, I hate to tell you what Eileen thought about that, but I know what she thought about it. And I think once you accept the fact that you cannot repeat the phenomena, that spontaneous phenomena work much more than other labs in the world, properly observed, then I think you have something.
Well, I mean, you and I do have something in common here. Just so you can put this in some sort of larger perspective, I would say that I don't have much use for most behavioral research. I mean, I think that if you really want to understand something about human beings, you don't put them in a lab. I mean, that's the sort of thing done by people who generally aren't very perceptive to begin with. I mean, I think just as in psychology, the best results are going to be, the greatest insights will be provided by people who actually understand human beings, and you don't need to take them into a lab. We're just keen observers who have a nose for phenomena. I'd say the same thing is going to be true about parapsychology.
But why bother with skeptics? It's a waste of time.
Well, to some extent I think that's right, except that they're often in a politically powerful position, so sometimes you need to. But in general, I think it is a waste of time. Skeptics tied up Chuck Arnerton for decades.
You know what the word skeptic means originally.
Go ahead.
There was a man named Sonny Fox who said that he was a skeptic because he thought what Ryan did was a waste of time, and parapsychology was a pseudoscience, and he was a skeptic. And this was before an audience of went out over 7 million people on Channel 5. So I got real mad. I said, "Do you know the derivation of the term skeptic?" He said, "No, I don't know." So then let me enlighten you. Skeptic comes from skeptikos in Greek, who were the inhabitants of the town of Skepsis in Asia Minor, known for the stupidity of her inhabitants. That is true. Skeptikos in Greek means dumbbell. And I don't think he liked that.
Wonder why, Hans? George.
Do you consider fear of psi healthy and evolutionarily adaptive?
Well, probably not. I don't consider fear of psi unhealthy. I mean, I think what's healthy or unhealthy is how we deal with it. I think Plato characterized courage as knowing what to fear. So fear is okay. What may or may not be acceptable is whether we run from it or face it. Whether it's adaptive or not, in general, I think that it's more adaptive to know what's going on around us. Although sometimes, the Iceman Cometh is playing in New York City. Sometimes it's good to be comfortable with our illusions, but in general, I think it isn't. So if human beings are really playing a kind of important role in the course of events, and we keep our blinders on, we might be blindsided. There's the Yiddish distinction between a schlemiel and a schlemazel. Mm-hmm. A schlemiel is someone who spills soup on himself. A schlemazel has it spilled on him. Mm-hmm. And schlemazels really exist. Actually, I lived next door to some schlemazels once. I'd like to know, actually, if they were schlemazels before they met and got married. It's too late to find that out now. There's no doubt that their life as a married couple was a living hell of aggravations and annoyances. And it seemed like everything they bought was defective. Electronic equipment would fail to work right out of the box. Their cars were always in the shop, even though they had brands noted for their reliability. Once, a very sturdy rocking chair that they had bought broke in their first week of ownership with their infant child on it. But my favorite example of their schlemazelness, if that's a word, was the wife bought this photograph that she really liked and had framed and hung in her living room. She thought it was the Golden Gate Bridge, and she called me over to see it, and I had to tell her, "Donna, that's the Brooklyn Bridge." I mean, here's a woman who both literally and symbolically bought the Brooklyn Bridge. Okay. Now, I mean, if we accept fairly readily, that through psychosomatic illnesses we can make ourselves sick, but if we might be causing ourselves to experience repeated misfortune, which is one of the interesting ways in which I think our self-loathing might manifest psychically, or if somebody's doing it to us, it seems to me it's a good idea to know what's going on so we can take appropriate countermeasures. So in that sense, I would say that it's not adaptive to ignore these things. Yes.
Would you say that the earlier mediums were able to produce bigger things because they attributed the phenomena to an external source rather than to themselves?
Yes. Yes, in fact.
I was just going to make a couple of comments. I feel like the earlier mediums had a certain grounding. It was like, they could transmit power because they had a spiritual grounding. And I think that you see that, like, for instance, many people in society, I'm not an academic, have just convinced themselves of the reality of these phenomena by small manifestations that really can't be explained, but in their own lives and in their own experiences. And so you see all this proliferation of all sorts of books on psychic phenomena that are basically appealing to this huge public population that already believes. So in reality, I don't actually feel that interested in whether the amazing Randy or anybody else feels that this phenomenon is valid or not, because it doesn't really relate to my life, and I think a lot of people feel that way. So I mean that's sort of a separate issue. But as far as scientific community goes, if you look at medicine, I mean, this tremendous craziness in medicine regarding nutrition is really, to me, a parallel. You go to hospitals where you're served Jell-O and Fruit Loops. For years, the huge, I'm not even joking, I went to Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. They had taken out the cafeteria and installed a McDonald's concession. So this is not a joke. It sounds like a joke, but it's true. So I'm just saying, the idea that you can deny, when there's huge amounts of evidence that what you put in your body affects your health, and deny it scientifically and as an authority and give that out to the public, to me seems really similar, in fact, to what you're describing.
Yeah, I sympathize with what you're saying. And I should say that, despite the way it may sound, I mean, I'm not even remotely evangelical about the stuff I believe. I mean, I don't care whether anybody accepts my beliefs about the reality of psi. But because I'm sort of a, I was going to say respected member, but let's say sort of, I'm a member of the academic community now. I'm in an unusual position to communicate with people who would not listen to anybody else. In that way, I think it turns out to have been a good thing, so maybe in a sense it was in the short term adaptive, that I put it all on the back burner for a while until I got tenure, because having published for 7 years in philosophy of language and logic, I had the kind of reputation so that when I started doing research in this area, I mean, certainly some people were snotty as hell to me, but there were others in philosophy and elsewhere who were willing to say to me, well, if somebody's got to be doing this, I'm glad it's you. And I know that there are people who would listen to me who would not listen to other, say, philosophers or other academics who started doing this work at the beginning of their career. Because it's all too easy to dismiss them by saying, well, look, they couldn't cut it doing standard stuff. So
I do think it's good to sort of take more of a worldview, because, then you're sort of in the box with them. You don't want to stay in the same box with them all the time, because it's not enough oxygen.
Well, gee, I'd like to think that I don't suffocate in that
I mean, you're sort of in between, and I think that you don't necessarily, I don't know, you see that with scientists, they all talk to each other, and the public is sort of like the hoi polloi, they're really not included in some way.
Yeah, well,
In this case, I think that popular opinion will eventually change scientific opinion, and it does happen that way in some fields.
it might.
It's happening in terms of nutrition.
And I think there's something to be said for educating the public who might not otherwise have been exposed to some of the academic concerns about this material. I mean, I'm writing a book now on survival, and even if my beliefs about this turn out to be very close at the end of things to those people who haven't thought through the issues, I still think there's some value in knowing what the issues
Oh, no, I
are.
agree. I certainly agree.
So,
I just mean don't get discouraged.
No,
It's
I'm not
like it
discouraged.
could get discouraging if you keep relating to that. You know what I mean? It seems like.
I'm just a cynical old fart at this point. It absolutely does not matter. I mean, look, I think that most academic and other disciplines are deficient in the one virtue that's supposed to characterize the field. I mean, what I mean is that I think that scientists aren't objective, that philosophers aren't wise, that psychologists aren't perceptive, that historians lack perspective, that physicians aren't healers, that lawyers don't give a shit about justice, that artists lack taste, that so on and so on. And so, but that's another lecture. Yeah.
Okay, as an experimental scientist, I think I have to speak out and just say that I'm not going to let you discourage me either, because I think the problem with most spontaneous cases is that unless you're there to see it with your own eyes, most people will never believe it. And it is so difficult to make, to prove that there was no trickery involved. And while you can't be 100% certain, even under laboratory-controlled conditions, that you've eliminated all possibility of trickery, you can hope that you've eliminated a majority of the possibilities where it would come through. And now that we have 50 years of experimental data with phenomena that replicate over and over and over again in laboratory conditions, to the point where you can have over 100 studies in a meta-analysis, and we now have a couple of dozen huge meta-analyses in parapsychology that show very respectable effect sizes that are consistent from study to study. Whether the conditions are tightly controlled or a little more sloppy, the effect size is still there. And personally, I find that body of evidence much more convincing than a second or third hand report of some marvel that happened somewhere under uncontrolled conditions that very few people actually saw. And I think that this body of scientific evidence is what's going to convince the academic community.
Well, see, I don't think you've given the only option to the laboratory work. First of all, I agree with you that the laboratory work establishes the existence of psi, but it doesn't tell us anything about it. So enough already. If we want to learn something about it, then we've got to try something new. I mean, we might just be applying the wrong tool. And the only remaining option is not second or third hand reports. I'd say the best option is to find people who can seem to produce larger scale phenomena more or less on demand. We've had such subjects in the past. It's not just second or third hand reports. We've got lots of first-rate first-hand accounts. And that's what makes the case of D.D. Hume so valuable. It's what makes the case of Eusebio Palladino so valuable. And those cases cannot be dismissed with the usual sorts of glib, skeptical arguments.
It seems like your rant, I was really excited about it, especially when you were talking about the Rhinian faults. But then it kind of slipped into like a priestly caste schism of bigger phenomena is better, though there doesn't seem to be any qualitative. I mean, you kind of deflate your own argument. You say, well, there's no real qualitative difference in moving a pencil or causing a major phenomena, say an accordion in a box. I think and I think you've overlooked, when you were deconstructing, I think pretty well, the skeptics' criticism. I think you overlooked the most important criticism, and it doesn't just come from the skeptics, it comes from the lay people, and that's, so what? What can you do to help me? The other scientists, from the physicists to the doctors to the other people, they can say, this is what we do for you. We build you your glasses, we build you your bridges, your Brooklyn bridges that you can photograph. I don't see we're going out in the field or going out into the laboratory the way we're doing it now. I don't see where we're ever going to be able to answer the so what question. We may be able to answer the does it exist question. But most people, the polls say that most people believe it exists already. So, like I said, we'd be done with it. And I don't see the advantage of fieldwork over laboratory for asking the so what question.
Okay.
I'd like to hear you address that.
All right, you
Question for you.
Okay.
What do you think about the existence of the other side of life?
Well, wait a minute. I want to deal with this one first.
All right.
You raised a lot of points, so if I miss one, remind me which ones I missed. Okay. First of all, it's not that I said I believe that there is no qualitative difference or no practical difference between the large and the small scale. What I said was that once we accept the little phenomena, conceptually there's no reason to not accept the big. The reason why I think the big is better, in a way, is just because it's harder to explain. That is, so long, I mean, one of the reasons I don't worry about the case of Uri Geller, among others, is that whether or not Geller is legitimate, his phenomena can be easily mimicked by sleight of hand. So let's deal with phenomena where those kinds of considerations can't arise. So when D.D. Hume makes the accordion move, or when he walks into a room where he's never been before and the bookshelf starts walking toward the company, I think there we're dealing with more problematic phenomena right from the beginning. And certain skeptical lines of argument are just undercut right there. So that's one of the reasons I focused on those. So what? I don't know whether we'll be able to answer that either, but I think our only chance of getting any further insight into the nature of psi is to figure out what it's doing out there in life, and to figure out what its natural history is. And I think that's going to take the kind of keen observer that we see all too infrequently in parapsychology. I think Jewel Eisenbuch was one. Someone who had the sensitivity and the perceptivity to try to discern its very subtle manifestations and connect it up with some of our deeper needs and interests.
What is the name? Is it Jewel Eisenbuch?
Jewel Eisenbuch, Eisenbud. Wrote quite a number of books about psi in the psychotherapeutic and psychoanalytic setting. But the fact is there haven't been too many keen observers. But until we have good presumptive subjects, so that we can say, this person probably has a lot to do with it, until then, we don't even know who to study. And so I'd say that one of the reasons I focused on the PK superstars is that there we at least have some idea who we need to look at. And if we can discern interesting patterns in their phenomena and hook it up with things going on in their lives, then we might start to have clues about what to look for. I mean, I think one of the ways in which to try to answer the so what question is to deal with schlemazelns. I mean, I actually think if you want to find out what psi is doing, consider how it might be manifesting in day-to-day life. And one of them, I'd say, is to have us look at people who are unusually lucky or unlucky, and not in the sort of eviscerated way that Richard Wiseman tried to do it. Okay, try to find people who are really unlucky or lucky in some meaningful way. You know, people who are schlemazelns like my neighbors, and see to what extent a psi hypothesis makes more sense of their astounding good fortune or bad fortune in a way that no other hypothesis would. Again, I don't think it'll ever be conclusive, but only in that way, I think, will we ever start to answer the so what question. Yes?
As an actress, I think that the problem with a controlled situation is you can take me and another person, put us in a room. If that person has stage fright, they can't perform. If you put me up there, I know I can perform. I'm an actress. That's the problem with controlled circumstances. You may get someone who has the ability, but when you get them in front of a room with scientists in it, they know that they're supposed to perform. They may not be capable of doing that.
Most human capacities, I'd say, are that way. That's why I'm pretty much down on experimental psychology. I mean, I think if you want to understand most of what's interesting about human beings, you have to actually watch them in life. I mean, if you want to learn about most interesting human capacities, like the capacity to be compassionate or funny or diplomatic or sensual or whatever, you're actually going to have to see what they do in life situations. And most people have various sorts of specific situations in which they can exhibit the various capacities or certain sides of themselves. Okay, Hans, your question.
I asked you a very leading question. What is your position on the fact's existence of what I call the other side of life? Because it is my conviction that none of these phenomena happen without the existence and the intervention of that side.
I would have to plead agnosticism at the moment. I mean, the reason I'm writing a book on survival is to find out what my views are.
Okay.
I'm never satisfied. I mean, you know,
You consider it.
I have suspicions, but the reason I like to write books is that only then do I feel I've worked through the issues in a way that satisfies me. So
I don't think the phenomena are caused by anyone to whom they occur. They're merely the telephone between worlds, or the vehicle, and nothing more.
I don't even think that instinctively I go with that, but because it seems to me that we do all sorts of things to one another, and if we have psychic abilities at all, then I don't see why some of them can't just manifest in things that we do to one another, or things we do right here.
Who is in charge? Somebody.
Why does somebody have to be in charge?
Well, I think that
Even in businesses, that's not the case.
I don't think we originate any of it without some help.
Well, I mean, whether we're caused to exist is one thing. Whether we're directed at every moment on the stage, I have a challenge.
I just finished a book about that, from the evidence.
Well, perhaps you'll convince me. Yes.
Going again on the hypothesis that psi exists, and there are, as you put it, superstar psychic subjects, can you elucidate any views on why certain people seem to have more psi than others?
It's a good question, and I think we don't have a clue, and I'll tell you one reason why I don't have a clue. And see, this is one of the reasons why I think it's been premature to actually try to bring psi into the lab, because we don't know what it is we're bringing into it. We don't know what a psychic superstar is. We don't know what a psychic ability is. So we don't know, for example, whether psychic abilities are things which, like musical abilities, seem to be unevenly distributed in the population. If they are, then a psychic virtuoso would be something analogous to a musical virtuoso. Okay? But a psychic virtuoso might be something else. It could be that psychic functioning is something most of us or all of us do all the time, more or less involuntarily, like gastrointestinal functioning. But only a few of us do it in ways that are conspicuous. And maybe only a few of us have, like the yogi who can control vasoconstriction and vasodilation on different parts of the hand. It may be that the psychic superstar has this kind of meta ability, the ability to harness in conspicuous ways things that most of us are doing, whether we want to or not, all the time. So it might be, and actually this is sort of the view to which I'm inclined at the moment, I suspect that most of us are functioning psychically, more or less unconsciously, all the time, not necessarily successfully. I think it's pretty much a miracle that any of our psychic wishes get fulfilled. But and I can explain that.
Well, no, go ahead. Answer this.
So my suspicion is that the psychic virtuoso is going to be somebody who has this very relatively rare ability to harness something that most of us ordinarily do more or less instinctively or involuntarily, and it's difficult to harness. Actually, Eisenbud had very interesting things to suggest about this too. I mean, Eisenbud thought that the fear of psi played a role in probably the most replicable of all psychic effects. That's the decline effect. It's as if the community of minds periodically just freaks out at the presence of a superstar and conspires to do something to keep the superstar under wraps, much in the way in which we deal with someone who breaks the law. And that would be a fear response based, I believe, on the sort of thing that I was mentioning, because if we allow it into the picture, then we're going to have to potentially accept responsibility for things we don't want to dirty our hands with. You had a question.
Yeah, just well, actually it's connected because I feel that lately a lot of children come, really young children with abilities that I feel maybe are more developed than the ones we came with. And I was just wondering if anybody's looking at it, and I'm really maybe exploring how these children have these abilities, or really seeing that they're different than others.
There have been studies suggesting that children become less psychic the more schooling they have. And it makes sense to me. I think education usually does more harm than good, but just gives us more complicated ways of screwing up in life. Enlarges our repertoire of possible mistakes.
So you say all children usually come more psychic, and then as they evolve and develop, they lose it because we indoctrinate them into the way we think? Through whatever
I suspect something like that happens in a lot of cases. I mean, I think children come into the world more imaginative than we usually end up being. They have to learn to monitor themselves in ways that hang up adults, but not children.
But it just happens that I know at least of 3 children. One was 4 when she had an amazing talk with her mother. Another is 3, and another one was like also 4 or 5, where she was having dreams explaining the mother from past lives or so. So there's so much there. Is there anybody picking on it?
Stephen.
I'm not aware of anybody at the moment, but you reminded me of something else. I've once read of some studies according to which we come into the world with perfect pitch, and that it usually is suppressed culturally in favor of relative pitch. And in some cases, especially cases of trauma, tone deafness. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that there are a whole range of abilities that are part of our native equipment which get suppressed for one reason or another. There's no doubt that adults have hang-ups that children don't. Yes.
Earlier it was stated that the populace, whatever percentage, a large percentage, better than 50%, believes in the existence of something out there, or God, call it psi, whatever you want. And it seems to me that that's an attraction. People turn on the X-Files. People are very interested in other worlds. We're all here tonight. There's an interest. And you bring up the interesting side of that interest, which is fear. Kind of like the moth to the bulb, that it wants to get to the bulb, but you can get burned. Can you address in the popular consciousness how this manifests? In other words, everybody runs the tabloids and wants to find UFOs and Mars and all that. Yet, we're afraid of it. Now, are we only afraid of the real thing when we experience it, or is our fear somehow driving us toward our attraction, in your opinion?
It's a big question that I won't pretend to have any sort of synoptic answer to.
Okay.
We're often attracted and repelled by the same things. And,
right.
We might be attracted to psychic abilities because at least some of the time we think about the beneficial side of it, and then it freaks us out because we recognize that things can't be used exclusively for the good.
Okay.
And so we recognize that there's a flip side to it. I'm sure there are all sorts of things going on.
But they go hand in hand. You'd agree?
Yeah, I would say they do.
Yeah, that the attraction and the...
Yeah. And I mean, you'd see the same sorts of ambivalence within parapsychology. In people who have been willing to suffer a certain amount of abuse and ridicule by making their careers in the field, but demonstrate their fear and loathing of it in a variety of ways nevertheless.
I just wanted to bring up a point related to your previous question about psychic superstars. And it's interesting because today the most of what you would call superstars are the people who were involved in the remote viewing experiments out in California that were under the heading of so-called psychic espionage. And most of these people, when they started out, they did not think they were psychic. They were selected pretty much randomly from the population. Many of them were military men, businessmen. They did not claim any psychic ability or experiences at all, and most of them didn't even believe in it. But they were trained and over several years. And I think that's actually true of several other superstars. I'm thinking of Alan Vaughan, who's a noted psychic and not unknown to this foundation. I'm just reading one of his autobiography books, and he says that when he got interested in the field...
How many are there?
Yeah.
Well, I think he's done another one since '73, I'm not sure. But, he trained himself. He went to London. He studied at the College of Psychic Studies with mediums. He went to clairvoyants and sensitives. He did meditation exercises and precognitive exercises, and it turned out he had a lot of ability that he didn't know about in advance. Now, that still doesn't answer the question of whether some people have more ability to start with than others, but it's encouraging in the sense that maybe this can be developed with the proper training.
And it may also lower the fear level, I would think. Just because you do something a lot.
Or increase it.
Well, I don't know, I think it could.
When it really starts to
Something similar happened in physical mediumship too. I mean, there are people who started attending seances initially as a curious participant and found out that, at least it appeared that they were the focus of whatever was going on. And so they then went on to practice more and develop their own parent abilities. So there are parallels there as well. I mean, there are parallels in other abilities too. People sometimes find out that they have musical or mathematical abilities because they suddenly try something that they had never tried before. Or that their environment was just one that wasn't conducive to giving it a shot in the past. So, I mean, to me that just suggests there's a kind of continuity between psychic functioning and other sorts of cognitive functioning which we should take seriously and look for the parallels. Yeah.
This is not about, I know you really can't answer this, but I'll ask anyway. How much fraud do you think there is in this field in terms of just popular people claiming to be psychic? And, you know,
There's plenty.
And,
I've caught my share.
oh, you have it? Like, yeah, I'm just curious. Because I think there are a lot of people who are very sincere, but then I'm wondering are a lot, I don't know.
Yeah, they're out there. I mean, psychic opportunism as a growth industry is something that started back in the heyday of spiritualism when mediumship first became really big. And I mean, people gifted with little more than magnetic personalities and some skill at fast hands and diversion techniques realized that there was a gold mine here. And, you know, that led to another growth industry, debunking. And, so, you know, with the inevitability of economic law, you know, we see all these things coexisting. And things haven't changed really for the past 120, 30 years. Yeah.
You mentioned Palladino several times. Are you familiar with the fact that in this library there are letters of Palladino stating that he was a fraud?
She.
Oh,
there also. I haven't read the ones in this library. I mean, I know that there are those letters.
She definitely said, you know, even Conan Doyle didn't believe it after.
Well, Palladino always said that she would cheat if given the chance.
Okay. So
there's no news there. I mean, actually the reason I think the case of Palladino is as strong as it is because knowing that she could cheat and knowing what her repertoire was, the strongest piece of evidence is the 1908 Naples sittings where the SPR dispatched 3 skilled investigators of physical mediums who knew what she could do, knew what to look for, and investigated her under really terrific conditions.
Are you going to respond to Richard Wiseman's attack on that?
I did in the new edition of Lilith. I think Wiseman's attack is frivolous and really stupid. That's the short version. If you want to know the details, you know, gotta have to buy the damn book.
By the way, I just wanted to say, that was an attacking question saying, well, she admitted fraud, so therefore how can you say she was great? Because I'm of the opinion that fraud actually elicits the phenomena. But that's all other.
Oh, well, actually, people have been saying that for years. I mean, William James used to point out that sometimes you need to give the phenomena a little push just to get it started. I mean, he talks about an anatomy professor who was doing a demonstration where a frog was supposed to do something. I forget what it was, but the frog wasn't behaving appropriately, so he moved the frog's leg by himself.
Yeah.
Because that was what was supposed to occur.
Having developed at least half a dozen successful professional psychics over the last 25 years, I've come to the conclusion that the only proof we have is the proof of performance. If a professional psychic comes up with information of a detailed kind that could not be obtained in any way whatsoever, that is a good psychic. And I deal only with people of that kind. Now, if you're dealing with physical phenomena, it's another matter. I talk about mental phenomena, knowledge could only be obtained if there is indeed a contact with what I have come to call the other side of life. And if that contact becomes so elaborate and so detailed and so incredibly plentiful in a few cases, it is a talent. It is simply a gift. Like people can play the piano, Paderewski did it better. It's nothing more than that. And we don't know why some are selected, but it is a talent. And I found when it works, it works. And anyone less than that, I'm not talking about the line.
Are you talking about a talent among the living?
Yes, it is a talent to earn a living.
So you do reject explanations in terms of discarnate agencies?
In terms of what?
Discarnate agencies.
Well, I think it is a gift that the person then uses. But the proof that a gift, I want proof that gift, the talent, can only be obtained if knowledge, information of a detailed kind is obtained
through such a person that cannot be obtained any other way. And if it is something that this person does repeatedly, under different circumstances, then you have no other explanation.
Well, I'm sympathetic to that, but I'd say there's a parallel with physical phenomena. And I'd say you have similar problems in both cases. I mean, trying to establish that in one case the knowledge couldn't have been obtained any other way, and in the case of physical phenomena, that the phenomena couldn't have been produced any way other than paranormal.
That's true.
I mean, I'd say you face similar problems. And I would say one of the reasons I'm interested in writing the book I'm writing on survival is that there are a lot of things about human beings we don't understand at all. I think in order to assess the evidence for survival, we need to know a whole lot more than we do at present about all sorts of human abilities, such as the ability to master languages. I think we need to understand much more than we do now about savants and prodigies, and about dissociation and the way in which dissociation and other altered states might be conducive to exceptional functioning, how it might liberate otherwise latent talents that most of us might have. I think we have only the dimmest handle on those issues, and I think they're crucial before we can understand what's normal and what's paranormal. But that's another lecture too.
Just to get back to the beginning story, and maybe I missed it because I came a few minutes later, about your table levitating. So you got the fear at that moment.
In a big way.
In a big way. What about the other two?
Well, they were veterans. They'd done it before. And I didn't discuss my fear with them a whole lot at the time. I was sort of caught up in the fascination of it all, and I really didn't speak a whole lot about it. I really put it on the back burner. I mean, it's something, if I wanted to, I presumably could have pursued with them for some time afterwards. I didn't exactly finish my graduate education on the spot there. So I put it aside. I wasn't ready to deal with it. It was the wrong time in my life to deal with it.
And then when you did deal with it,
Then I caught hell.
Well, how do you explain that phenomenon?
I believe that one or more of us in the room was levitating the table. I think given the nature of the communicators, there's no reason to think that that John Wayne was playing a role, much less that the River Styx was. And I don't think that there's any evidence that Horace T. Jeckham moved the table either. I think it's more plausible that one or more of us did, in ways that we've seen plenty of times since, like the Philip experiments or the Bachelor experiments and so on.
Well, it's your contention that if you took your same three friends in a similar table, and you had Ruth or some other experimental psychiatrist, psychologist, or researcher there, you think nothing valuable would have been gained by that experience, done in a controlled setting?
What would have made it more controlled? Just having somebody else there?
Well, for example, you could have different, recording devices or whatever. For you, that would have no impact.
What would it show?
I don't know, because it's a hypothetical. For example, they did, the Philip experiment, right? And they had the different stress gauges and things like that, so that they could show that, in certain thrusts that, in all this electromagnetic stuff that's coming out now, that, the geoelectromagnetic, or for example, Roll's idea of the radiation of poltergeist phenomena, that, it goes out.
Look, here's the problem. This is why I have little sympathy with people who go into haunting or poltergeist situations with lots of electronic gear. If we can make objects fly across the room, you don't think we can affect instrument readings? We know we can affect instrument readings. So
Waste of time to...
there's no way to tell what's causing the instrument readings. If there's a human agent that's causing the object movements that are supposed to be associated with the instrument readings, who knows what's causing the instrument reading? It's a conceit to think that we have any way of teasing that out. I think we can make valuable correlations with geomagnetic stuff. I'm willing to concede, at least tentatively, that the regular cycles of geomagnetism are not things that we're affecting or controlling, or the correlations with psi phenomena in sidereal time.
But then how do you explain? Well, then you run into the problem of the white ghost I wasn't there too. The idea that PK can affect the mind, and the famous seance studies where people reported seeing all sorts of things that weren't there, that may have, with a camera or something, been able to perceive or not perceive. You know, nothing against you personally, but you seem to have given us nothing valuable about your experience as a perceiver from the field work. I'm anthropologically trained, so I have a skepticism towards the value of field work as being able to actually pull something out of that. I think it's very, very difficult. And I think it's good to point out the criticisms of lab studies, but you haven't really put something in its place that seems any more valuable.
Well, that's another talk. I mean, that's why I wrote The Limits of Influence, okay?
Yeah, right.
And I wouldn't say that my table tilting experience was valuable so much as a piece of evidence, okay? It was a jumping off point to talk about the fear of psi, okay? I mean, I think there are non-experimental bodies of evidence that are thoroughly compelling. And,
compelling in what way? The proof of the existence of the phenomena? Or compelling in that it teaches us something about the phenomena?
both. I mean, certainly as proof, but I think it gives us more of a handle on the extent or the range or the scope of psi as well. I mean, when people wonder about the viability of so-called super psi explanations, I mean, one of the big questions is it antecedently implausible to suppose that psi could have produced the phenomenon of some given magnitude? Now, one of the things I think we learned from the history of physical mediumship is that even if we don't have there what we would want to call super psi, although it's not clear what our scale would be, we at the very least have something we have to call dandy psi. I mean, so if you accept the evidence for large-scale object movements or even partial materialization, you know, like Hume's materialized hands that end at the wrist and shake hands with people and then dissolve in their grasp, or the accordion phenomenon. That is so much more interesting than the sorts of things gathered in the pair experiments or Schmidt's experiments.
Yeah, but it seems like you've made an arbitrary break at the brain, saying, okay, we can't trust the cameras, we can't trust the recording instrument, but we can somehow trust the physical organism. That is not going to be manipulated by the PK or the phenomena around us. Our perceptions are not going to be manipulated. And I'm not...
Well, no, you're making a good point. I mean, would I say, for example, that in the 25 years of phenomena of D.V. Hume, it's more parsimonious to suppose that Hume simply PK'd the minds or the brains, if you want, of all his observers, so
or
that...
hypnotized it,
Yeah.
as some critics have pointed out.
Well, now hypnosis is something I think I know a bit about, and given the variable levels of hypnotic suggestibility, I'd say it's antecedently incredible that everybody could have been hypnotized without massive preliminaries to it, and even then to report the same things. I mean, that seems inconsistent with what we know about hypnosis. I don't think we can rule out in principle the idea that Hume might have influenced telepathically or PK'd the minds or the brains of everybody involved, but I'd say that's a less parsimonious hypothesis.
Why is it less parsimonious?
Because there are lingering physical effects, for one thing, so that if Hume, I mean, there are reports of Hume levitating a large table, for example, which then fell forcibly to the ground, breaking the table. So if you've got lingering physical effects, like the broken table, you're going to have to explain lingering misperceptions. So if you've got instrument readings and recordings that are preserved in some sort of way after the actual experiment.
Which most recordings are. I mean, I can think of no recording that is done that isn't preserved after the event.
Oh, well, I mean, some would be, if they're just instrument readings taken at the time on magnetometers or something like that.
I think
It's
most
analog, not digital.
Yeah. So if you've got something that persists after the actual moment of the experiment when the phenomenon occurred, and that would have been produced by the phenomenon if it had occurred in the way that it was reported, then I'd say you have a prima facie case for thinking that you were dealing with a real physical effect.
So there's nothing against using the recording devices?
No,
You
it's
know
just,
what I mean?
it has to, no. What I'm saying is that recording devices won't resolve a certain kind of ambiguity. It's not going to help us understand more about the origin of the phenomena or the nature of the phenomena, except maybe that it's a genuinely physical phenomenon.
Or that it can affect magnetic tape, or that it can...
Well, we have to be careful there because we can't trace any clear causal lines. If we don't know who the agent is, then, I mean, if it could be the person operating the equipment, if it was the subject under investigation.
But I don't see where that's any different than your broken table. Or it's any more or less...
But wait, you're asking a different question there. You were asking the other question, how we know it's a real physical effect as opposed to, say, just massive communal PK. That's one thing. The other question, though, is how we know we're dealing with psi on the part of this person or on this person, or whether it's due to some sort of process going on around them that isn't intention-based. So there's no way to know that just by bringing equipment into the picture.
Well, the multi-lab would move a step towards that.
Yes, so I'd say if you have a subject, a contemporary analog of a Hume or Palladino, some superstar subject who can get more or less similar results in different situations with different experimenters in different labs, then you have a prima facie case for saying this person is implicated causally in the results. But that's not what happens when you go out on a poltergeist investigation or haunting armed with reams of fancy electronic equipment. That isn't going to tell you anything.
Well, we'll tell you that physical effect. You won't know who caused the physical effect.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, the reason people are bringing it there is to make it look scientific as if they're going to get to the bottom of things, which I think is rubbish.
The reason it doesn't tell you anything is because you do not allow for the intervention of discarnates. Unless you accept that, it makes no sense. At least to me, it makes no sense. After 30 years of doing this work, I'm totally convinced of it.
But how do you trace the causal lines to discarnates any more clearly than to incarnates?
Well, of course, by having knowledge that only a discarnate would have, that could be checked independently by a third party. There has to be some evidence.
See, my inclination there is that mere information is not enough to do the trick. That if it's something that's confirmable, then it's out there in the world. It can be gathered by clairvoyance or telepathy.
But it should be included as one of the possible causative factors.
Oh, yeah. But I'd say knowledge of mere pieces of information. If they're confirmable pieces of information, then the information was there in the world for the subject to gather clairvoyantly or telepathically.
Not necessarily in this world.
No, I'm saying if it's there so that it can be confirmable by living people, so we can say, yeah, this was a piece of information, then the psychic could have done it himself or herself.
Well,
I'd say more important are matters of intention and motivation and perhaps abilities. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Or perhaps abilities that were idiosyncratically associated with the subject. So if I suddenly started behaving in a very Bertrand Russell-esque way, adopting some of his mannerisms, which I've never studied, that might be more initially compelling than mere bits of information.
Well, the Myers experiments and the ear of Dionysus were done so many years ago, and I don't think anybody doubts them.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying I would, but I mean, of course people...
I wasn't there, but,
But that's another talk. I mean, don't get me on the survival thing now. And besides, we want to finish the book. All
right. Peace.
I have a feeling we're reaching sort of a natural or unnatural conclusion.
Well, will you promise to come back and discuss the survival book when that's ready?
No.
Yeah. No. Come on, be a sport.
Okay.
Thank you for a really interesting... And a deeper appreciation of schmozzles. Say it again. Schmozzles. Is this yours? Can I look at it? Just look over there.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed today's selection. My name is Lizette Coley and I serve as president of Parapsychology Foundation. I hope you give us a like, and if you have a comment, then do so below and we'll try and better serve you. Any suggestions are welcome. And we want to thank very much our loyal subscribers. This is a relatively new channel and a new venture for Parapsychology Foundation, so we very much appreciate your loyalty. And if you haven't decided to subscribe, maybe pretty please you could.